Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads. We're going to continue with the next Kaya story, Kaya's Escape. I believe Kaya is when they started giving the American Girl books some different names for the stories because, Kaya was before, I don't know, like civilization or something. Anyway, Chapter 1, Taken Captive. Kaya dug her fists into the sides of her waist and stretched. Her back was sore from bending over to pick the huckleberries. Since first light, she and the other girls had moved along the hillside, plucking ripe berries from the bushes and dropping them in the baskets they wore at their waists. Now the sun was high and overhead. It was time to sort and dry the berries they picked in the cooler hours. Kaya thought dried berries were good, but ripe ones were a feast. When she thought no one was looking, she sneaked a handful for herself. "Look, Magpie stealing berries," Little Fawn cried. "If she eats too many now, we won't have any when the winter comes." She gave Kaya a teasing grin. Kaya winced. Not a single day went by without someone calling her that awful nickname, Magpie. Earlier in the summer, while visiting her father's family in Wallowa, she had gone off to race her horse when she was supposed to be taking care of her little brothers. Whip Woman had told Kaya she was no more responsible than a thieving magpie. When all the children were switched for Kaya's disobedience, they began calling her Magpie. Every time Kaya heard the nickname, it stung like Whip Woman's switch. It was now late summer, and Kaya was back in Salmon River country, where her family had joined her mother's band of Nimipu. They had traveled upstream and set up camp to pick berries in the higher country. Her father and many of the other men had gone even further into the mountains to scout deer and elk trails. It was time for the hunt. Soon the men would bring back as much game as they could so that everyone but plenty of meat for the winter. With the dried meat, fish, and berries, there would be good provisions for the cold season to come. Kaya untied the basket from her belt and spread leaves over the berries to keep them from falling out of the basket. She set her basket with those her mother and her big sister Brown Deer had filled. All the women and girls had been berry picking. Even the youngest girls wore a little basket, though they were allowed to eat more berries than they'd saved. Kaya's grandmother was loading baskets into her horse. Kausta glanced over her shoulder at Kaya, then nodded at a little girl with her tiny basket. "Remember when you were that young?" she asked Kaya. "Remember how you'd run to give me the first few berries you picked?" Kaya smiled, glad to be reminded of those happy days. "I remember you always praised me for my berries," she said. "You said I'd be a good picker one day." "And you are," Kausta said. She hung the last bag onto her saddle, then patted her horse. Loading it, she began to walk others down the teepees and set the meadows near the stream. Kaya walked along Kausta, matching her strides to her grandmother's long ones. Heat rose from the stony paths and shivered around her legs. "The sun's hot, isn't it?" she said. "Uh-huh," Kaya agreed. "The day is hot, and our work is hard, but we need to pick berries so we won't go hungry this winter." Kaya studied the thick groves of lodgepole pines that ring in the hollow meadow. "Could Speaking Rain and I sleep outside the teepee tonight?" she said. "I think we'd be cool in the meadow." "We'll be cool inside," Cayusta said. "I want you two near me. With many of our men away, we'll be safer if we stay close together. The boys are keeping their herd close by too. Look, that's your horse with the others." Kaya shaded her eyes. She quickly identified Step's hide with a star on her forehead. Kaya's horse was grazing at the edge of the herd with some mares and their foals. Perhaps Step's hide sensed Kaya's approach, for she lifted her head and whinnied. Cayusta halted her horse. She picked some leaves from a thimbleberry plant beside the trail, then sprinkled a pinch of dried blood on the earth in thanks for what she had taken. She used the leaves to wipe sweat from Kaya's forehead and then dry her own face. Go sit in the shade of Speaking Rain for a while, she said. The heat has tired you. Kaya found Speaking Rain under a pine tree. Though Speaking Rain was blind, she had stayed in the couple with the elderly men and women. She was wearing a bare grass basket that Kaya had begun for her. I brought you some huckleberries, little sister, Kaya said. She placed a handful of berries into Speaking Rain's outstretched hands. Since Speaking Rain's parents had died, she lived with Kaya's family and had been a sister to her. Kaya sat beside Speaking Rain in the shade of the pine tree. Our dogs chased 2 black bears out of the berry bushes this morning, Kaya said. Everyone wants these berries, Speaking Rain said. She ate hers one by one, making them last as long as possible. As she munched, she tipped her head toward Kaya. Why do you sound so sad? Kaya knew she couldn't hide anything from Speaking Rain. Maybe because Speaking Rain couldn't see, she heard everything sharply. Little Fawn caught me sneaking huckleberries, Kaya admitted with a sigh. She called me Magpie again. I hope that nickname will fade soon, Speaking Rain said. Again, she cocked her head, listening. Isn't that your horse whinnying to you? Go to her. Nicknames don't mean a thing to a horse. Gratefully, Kaya squeezed Speaking Rain's hand. Speaking Rain always understood her. As Kaya walked around the herd, she whistled for her horse to her side. Kaya, stepside, rubbed her head against Kaya's shoulder. Her horse's muzzle was soft as the finest buckskin. Hello, beautiful one, Kaya whispered again, the horse's sleek neck. It was always comforted to Kaya to stroke her horse. As Stepside nuzzled her, Kaya glanced back at the clearing where women spread the berries on tulle mats to dry the sun. She saw her 2 little brothers bouncing on a crooked cedar tree, pretending to ride a horse. Nearby, little girls played with their buckskin dolls. Dogs lolled behind the teepees, their tongues out. In the wide meadow, boys rode herds around the horses. Thin clouds drifted toward the Bitterroot Mountains in the east. Stay close to the safe, Cayusta had reminded her. Cayusta was wise in these things, and Kaya had heard that warning all her life. But right now, this quiet valley seemed the safest place she could imagine. Listen, Cayusta said in a slow voice. The dogs are growling. Wake up. Kaya tried to waken up in the dead of night. She heard Cayusta's sharp command, but sleep was like a hand pushing down. Nearby, some dogs growled and then began to bark fiercely. Kaya sat up and rubbed her eyes. What was wrong? Her mother peeked out of the door of the dark teepee and then ducked back outside. Strangers in our camp, Easta said. Get dressed. Quick, enemies. Enemies in their camp. The morning was a jolt of lightning. Swiftly, Kaya was on her feet. Her heart pounding, struggled into her dress. Cayusta, Brown Deer, Speaking Rain were doing the same. They all tugged on their moccasins and crept out of the teepee. Cayusta pushed Speaking Rain and the twin boys ahead of her. Brown Deer picked up one of the boys. Easta picked up the other one. Follow me, Easta said. Kaya, take Speaking Rain to the woods. We'll hide there. Crouching, Easta ran for the trees, Brown Deer and Cayusta right on their heels. The moon was rising above the trees bordering the clear. Kaya could see women, children, and old people hurrying from their teepees for safety in the woods. Some man ran towards the other camp where dark figures tucked between the horses and tethered there. Raiders! Enemy raiders! They'd slipped in the camp hoping to make off with the best horses, but the dogs had given them away. Kaya's mouth was dry with alarm. She clasped Speaking Rain's hand, but instead of following Easta into the woods, as she had been told, she went into the direction of the herd. Where was Steps High? Would raiders try to steal her horse? Kaya saw the woman named Swan circling, head toward the horses too. A raider was about to cut the rawhide line that tethered her fine horse. Swan circling had much courage as any warrior. She stabbed at the raider with her digging stick. She knocked him away from her horse, which reared and whinnied in panic. The raider leaped onto the back of another horse she had already cut loose. With a fierce cry, he swung the horse around the gallop straight through camp, coming right at Kaya and Speaking Rain. With a gasp of fear, Kaya tried to run out of his way, pulling Speaking Rain behind her. Too late! Kaya threw herself onto her stomach, dragging Speaking Rain down with her. The raider jumped his horse over them and plunged on. Kaya struggled to her knees. Now other raiders raced through the camp toward the herd. They lay low on their horses, trying to stampede the herd as no one could ride after them. The horses snorted and screamed with alarm. A few broke away. With Steps High among them, Kaya whirled around. Nimipu men with bows and arrows were running to cut off the raiders. Arrows hissed by. Kaya grasped Speaking Rain's hand and ran for safety in the woods. A horse brushed against her, almost knocking her down. She felt someone seize her hair, then grasp her arm. Speaking Rain's hands yanked from hers. A raider swung Kaya roughly behind him onto the horse. She sank her teeth into his arm, but he broke her hold with a slap. Kaya looked back for Speaking Rain. Another rider was dragging her onto his horse. Speaking Rain, Kaya cried, but her cry was lost in the tumult. The raiders raced after the herd, which was full out now. The Nimipu men gave chase on foot, but they were quickly outdistanced. Terrified, Kaya clung to the raider's back. The herd was thundering down the valley, the raiders in the rear. The night was filled with boiling dust. Hoofbeats shook around and echoed in Kaya's chest. She caught a glimpse of Steps High running with the others. Her horse had been stolen by the enemies. She was their captive too, and so was Speaking Rain, and it was Kaya's fault. All that night and all through the next day and night, the raiders ran through with stolen horses eastward. When their mounts tired, they paused only briefly before jumping onto fresh horses and going on. Kaya knew they had been out of Nimipu country before they were caught. Because the raiders didn't rest, Kaya and Speaking Rain couldn't rest either. The mountains and the valley behind her went by in a blur. In her fatigue, Kaya sometimes thought she saw a blue lake in the sky. Sometimes she thought the distant rolling hills were huge buffalo. And sometimes she did asleep, her head bumping into the raider's back. He slapped her legs to awaken her. She thought then about jumping off, run to the horse, but she knew she'd be injured or killed on the narrow stony trail. Maybe it would be better to die than be a captive, Kaya thought, but she couldn't abandon Speaking Rain. When the sun was high overhead, the raiders finally stopped to rest. They left a scout to guard their trail and took the herd to a grassy spot by a little lake where the horses could feed and drink. Kaya saw Steps High standing by the water with other foam-flecked horses. Their heads were down, their chest heaved from the punishing journey. How she wished she could go be with her horse. When the raiders gathered to share the meat, Kaya got a better look at them. They were young, bold, and proud of themselves for stealing so many fine horses. She thought they spoke the language of enemies from buffalo country. Though Kaya couldn't understand their words, she knew that they boasted of their success. Perhaps they were proud too. They had driven the herd from all the way through Nimipu country to the northern trail near the Bitterroot Mountains. The raider who seized Speaking Rain offered some of the buffalo meat. When she didn't respond, he waved his hand in front of her eyes. They made a noise of disgust. Kaya knew he was angry that the girl he'd captured for a slave was blind. He pushed her down beside Kaya and stalked back to the circle of men. Kaya held her close. Speaking Rain leaned against Kaya's shoulder. "Where are we?" she whispered. "Somewhere on the trail to buffalo country," Kaya whispered back. She put some of the food she'd been given in the Speaking Rain's hand. "What will happen to us?" Speaking Rain's voice quavered. Though Kaya trembled with fatigue, she kept her voice steady. "Don't you remember what happened when our enemies from the south stole some of our horses? Our father and the other warriors got ready for a raid. As the drummers beat the drums, all the women sang songs to send off our warriors with courage. Our warriors followed the enemy all over the mountains and brought back all our horses. Our warriors will make a raid on these men too. They'll take you and me back with them, and take back all of our horses as well. Are you sure? Speaking Rain murmured. Uh-huh, Kaya whispered. I'm sure. But in her heart, Kaya was far from certain. Alright, they traveled a long way over the mountains. Tota and the others might not return to the berry-picking camp yet. When they did, the raiders might have already left the mountains and hidden themselves secure in the country to the east. What would happen to Kaya and Speaking Rain? And Steps High, then? Kaya squeezed Speaking Rain's hand. We have to be strong, little sister. Uh-huh, Speaking Rain agreed. We'll be strong. One of the raiders motioned the girls to lie down. He tied Kaya's leg to Speaking Rain's with a length of rawhide so they couldn't get away. Lying together, they often prayed to Hunyawat, asking for strength. Kaya was exhausted, but her head buzzed with fears. I'm afraid to sleep, she whispered to Speaking Rain. Me too, Speaking Rain whispered back. She put her cheek against Kaya's shoulder. Remember that lullaby Kayusta used to sing to us? Kaya nodded. Then, to her surprise, Speaking Rain began to sing gently. Ha no nani, ha no nani. She's my precious one, my own dear precious one. Kaya glanced at the raiders. Would they be angry at Speaking Rain's song? The men were lying down to rest. One glanced at Speaking Rain and shrugged as if he had nothing to fear from a lullaby. Lulled by Speaking Rain's gentle voice, Kaya slept. That's the end of that chapter. See you later.